the discussion is about, I will give you some background. So you are attending a forum hosted by the Jamaica Baptist Union Social Issues Commission. And when the COVID pandemic started and took root in Jamaica, the commission sought to identify certain issues where COVID might have had great impact, and thought how best to reach our constituency, our congregants, and wider, as to look on and reflect on some of these issues and the effects and possible solutions that we can brainstorm together. So last week was the first of the forums, and we looked at children, and we had Mr. Warren Thompson from the Children's Registry, who spoke about the effect of COVID on children. And in a sense, what he spoke about last week overlaps with this week. And this week, we are looking on Virtu-Cation. That is online education in all our institutions. And before I get deeper into that and tell you who our panelists are, I am going to invite one of our commission members, Mr. Andre Earl, just to open for us in prayer. Andre? Andre? All right. Well, it seems that Andre is not here. I apologize. I do not pray well, but...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Sorry to put you under that stress. I had a difficulty unmuting my mic. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your presence in our lives right now. Thank you for the blessings which you have given us in the ability to be able to learn, whether in person, limited though that may be, or in the virtual space. We thank you for the opportunity of having our children in particular continue to learn, even though they may not be able to attend a physical classroom. Lord, you know how challenging and even frightening and trying these times have been. But we know that your word says we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And so confident of your ever-present grace, support, and enabling, we trust you to help us through these difficult times of the COVID-19 pandemic. We pray for all students and teachers as they grapple with learning at this time. We pray for those who are feeling left out or left behind because of a lack of access to the virtual space. We ask that you would bless everyone, Heavenly Father, and help us to understand how to make it through these challenging times. Please help us to handle whatever is thrown our way, including having to do multiple jobs at the same time just to make ends meet. Help us, Heavenly Father, to remember those less fortunate than ourselves, so that at the end of the day, we can always do your will in seeking to bring everyone to a better place. Be with all presenters this evening. Be with our moderator. Guide the session, Heavenly Father. We pray for a lively interaction, and we ask that at the end of it all, everything that we do and say may be done to your glory, honor, and praised. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Now, thank you again. Now, the topic for tonight is Virtu-Cation. It's a combination word on virtual education. And we're really trying to look at how schools and educational institutions have been operating during this COVID pandemic. If one thing that the COVID has done, it has shown us the stark reality of certain inequities in our society. And if we never thought about it before, certainly in relation to education, data poverty is a real issue. The struggle is real. You have parents with one phone, with three or more children of varying school ages, whose schools have all migrated on and how is it that other issues, I mean, I think it's since the COVID has started that I now realize having to attend all of these meetings that between Flow and Digicel, I never realized that how unstable my internet is, and not only at home, but when I go to work and to other places. So that is also another feature. But we have assembled a panel who will take us through this issue. We have tried to assemble a panel which will include, we have a principal of a school, that is Mr. Linvern Wright, principal of the William Knibb High School. We have Mr. Cheslan Douglas, president of the National Student Council. They're, after all, the customers, the chief client base of this Virtu Education. And we have Miss Donette Corey Williams, who is a parent, but also a teacher. We hope to have on Dr. Kassan Troop, Chief Education Officer of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Culture, Ministry of Education and Youth, to go and guide us through the policy issues that the government and how the government is trying to deal with this issue. That she has not joined us yet. We hope that she will join us later. So each—
Good evening, sir. I am here.
Thank you, Dr. Troop. In fact, Dr. Troop, I will give you some time. I was going to begin with you, but since you have just joined, I will give you some time to acclimatize and start with someone else. So I am going to, but before I begin, all speakers will be given 10 minutes to make their statements, and then we will try to field questions through the chat, either on YouTube or on Zoom, so that you can have your issues properly dealt with by our guests. So, Mr. Linvern Wright, as a principal of a school, we are going to ask you about Virtu-Cation, and you have 10 minutes. You can unmute your mic and begin, sir.
Theme song.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brother Taylor. I'm not sure if you remember that we were pretty much at Michael together. I'm just giving you some trouble in that regard. But good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here and happy to be sharing with you. And I think that this issue of Virtu-Cation is something that has taken all of us in a way by surprise. Essentially, all of us are in a learning mode. I'm happy for this kind of forum in which we are trying to find answers to some of the things that we're all grappling with. It is a real huge issue. The issues of connectivity and gadgets is something that I think most of us know about. And so I don't think I necessarily have to get into that. The statistics have been pretty much well ventilated. They have been different for many, many persons. So for example, JTA would have done something which would have said that it's about 30% of students who consistently get any kind of connectivity. What I have found, for example, at William is that connectivity is more of a problem than gadgets. So the consistency of it, as we would have seen with Brother Jeremy's own connectivity just now, is one of the issues that many of us are faced with. So for me, the issue of connectivity and gadgets is pretty much well ventilated. It's out there, but there are one or two things that I pretty much would just like us to concentrate on, because Virtu-Cation is one of the things. Well, you realize that the tech companies are big in pushing that, that the technology is something that we need to sort out now, and the stocks are really raising. So while the stocks are raising in terms of profits, what is really happening is that our kids, in terms of the quality of their learning, pretty much are receding. And that's one of the things I think, we really need to, be looking at, because the truth is that technology might not be as efficient a mode of transmitting many of the things that we would care about, especially those of us, who really consider values to make sense. And I want to touch one or two of those things, as a principal. Many of you would have heard when I just became president of JAS. That's one of the things I had called for. And one of the big concerns, well, I get into that, but I'll start by saying schools were pretty much one of the few safe places left in society where we could consider transmission of values, to be consistent. So school would pretty much be doing that kind of thing. When you get into a Virtu-Cation mode, it's a difficult thing, because values call for proximity, calls for consistency. It calls for students, really listening, and adults having some kind of management of the space in which the students are. There is a concern right now with schools having been creches, pretty much where you send children and parents go to work, that our children who are really left by themselves, they are left to homes now, and they could very well be responsible parents, but these parents are out, at their jobs. They could be parents who many of us might not consider to be so responsible, but they might be out there. But the essential point I'm making is that virtual education is with the teachers not having proximity to the kids. It is something that we have to be concerned with, because right now for schools, I'll tell you as a principal, for example, when a teacher says to me that students are not really behaving in their virtual classes, you as the principal would be that final authority on it. The authority that you have to cede to now is the parent at home who might just not be there. And so in terms of disciplining, in terms of talking to the kid, in terms of all of those things, so the kid could pretty much just shut you out if it is that you want to get to them. You're making a call. I have made call to one kid in Lilliput recently, and she just pretty much never answered. It was the mother who answered maybe 2 days after. And they pretty much worked out an answer for me. So proximity and immediacy as things that you would really need to be dealing with issues of discipline and issues of values and issues of forming kids is one of those things that we have to really pay some attention to. And my guidance counselors at school and dean of discipline, we are all struggling with the answers as to how we can get that kind of thing sorted out. One of the other things is that school is pretty much one of the few safe spaces that are left for kids. And many of us would not understand sometimes how there are kids. So for example, I remember when I was at Rossi's, and one of the things that the guys who played football would tell me is that they preferred to be at school than being at home because of the violence that they actually were facing. And so the kind of cushion that schools could give these kids as a kind of respite from the violence is something that I think Virtu-Cation is taking very seriously. And those are some things that we pretty much may have to find answers to. Social bonds are things that kids would form in school, that students would form in schools. Many of them are really psychologically being affected by the fact that they can't see their friends, because that was something that was a big thing. And if any of you worked in schools, one of the things you would recognize that students really enjoy about school more than anything else is the fact that they were there to see their friends. Sometimes a teacher, sometimes a guidance counselor, sometimes a nurse was the person that these kids spoke to. And so the social bonds that many of them would form, that would be about building that part of them that needed that nurturing, that care, is a part of what Virtu-Cation isn't helping very well. It's also highly likely that students who would have been at risk are students who will be out of school. So that maybe 50% of students who are out of school, by some estimates. In many instances, these are at-risk students. And one of the things that you would have heard, for example, the government pushing is principals don't get into suspensions too much, because when the kids get home, what they get home to is something that is going to be worse for them in terms of reforming. Because what really you do if you suspend to get them to be better, the exposure they have when they get back into some of their communities is going to make them worse. Now, school is suspended by virtue of what COVID has done. And as such, I think many of these kids are now left up to many of the elements that many of us would consider undesirable for them, given how vulnerable they are and at risk they are. So Virtu-Cation is something that would have maybe made that worse. I think I have said already that discipline and order has shifted to our home. So I thought I'd dealt briefly with how this could affect values and affect the psychology, affect the human side of people. Because I think we're all clear about the fact that if you're not really getting instruction, there are going to be huge gaps in your learning. So in terms of what maybe people would have been expecting from me, in terms of what I would have had to say, I think it's the obvious that if you're not getting consistent and if you're not getting consistent instruction, if instruction is compromised by virtue of the platform that you have to use. Because one of the things that I have seen in the research is that, well, one is that to prepare well for online learning, you have to prepare maybe 4 times as much. And you would know, many of you would know how many teachers feel about planning. So that's one of the things that I think would suffer big time. But one of the other things that I think we have to pay attention to is that many of these kids any teacher who was struggling before in face-to-face learning is going to struggle twice or thrice as much in face-to-face learning. Because if they had issues, if for example, discipline, from my understanding, works very best through building relationships. If that matches building relationships with kids in face-to-face, online learning becomes a kind of rarefied challenge now. They really can't do much about relationships, and as such, they would lose the kids in terms of, having to give them feedback, in terms of engaging them, in terms of scaffolding the learning, because respect is one of the things that the kids would have to have for you in an online setting. And if they didn't have that, then they pretty much will just shut you out. And that's one of the things that that's suffering. Principals, I think many of us are suffering from the fact that for every teacher, every principal, every parent, every child, the experience of online learning, teaching, managing online platforms is a really difficult thing. I can tell many of my colleagues struggle with Google platforms because it's technology. It's something that many of us are not used to. And if you're not committed to spending some time to learning about it and understanding how you can adapt to doing management from that kind of platform in an efficient way as is possible, then it's going to be a huge issue for you. So once management gets compromised, then many other things. So management can be compromised, teaching can be compromised. And as such, the learning of many of the kids complaining on programs have been, that there are teachers who would not do the kinds of things that they should be doing with them in terms of giving the kind of feedback. So something like feedback suffers very, 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 very badly, and it's one of the things that that we have to pay some attention to. That the learning process for all of us, the learning curve for all within the system is long. For guidance counselors, for principals, for teachers is long. But I just make one final point, to summarize, that I think the academic side of things and the academic gaps that to the left are clear. They're glaring to us. I don't know that I have to get into that, but I also know that especially from a group like you, a church group, where I think the consistent focus on saying, look here, we need to pay some attention to values. I think a real concern is what is happening in terms of the gap that's going to be left in many of our kids in terms of the kind of values that are common to any society, really working in the way it should work. Values to me are the oil, that actually, carry the engine of society. And if it is that we are deprived of that in the sense that our schools are limited by virtue of Virtu-Cation, as you would say, then there's an issue. And I really hope we can do some ventilating on that. I want to thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. You have really given us a lot to think about. You've spoken to us about connectivity, especially with technology, and how issues with connectivity can lead to inconsistent instruction. You've spoken about the lack of proximity between the teachers and students, and discipline and reinforcement of learning. We've spoken about with the school migrating online, the school is no longer a refuge for some students who may seek some kind of comfort and consolation from outside of their homes. And also the breakdown of some social bonds. I never really thought about it at that time, but I'm thinking now that you have a generation of students who have passed PEP, started high school, and they have not seen inside their form room, and they are meeting all their peers online. There's no sitting beside each other, having lunch together, and so on. So you've really given us a lot to think about. Before I move on to our next panelist, I just want to welcome the Baptist students at UTC who have joined us and are listening in, along with Reverend Dr. Trevor Edwards. We now move on to Mr. Cheslan Douglas, student of the Carteret College and president of the National Students' Council. And he basically, his voice is important because he is basically the client. He is the customer of all this Virtu-Cation. So, Mr. Douglas, we wish to hear from you. Your 10 minutes begin now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Cheslan Douglas, the president of the National Secondary Students' Council. And on the topic of Virtu-Cation, it has really changed the modality of our education system in terms of teaching and learning. It's a new normal that it seems that we're going to have to get used to. And at the NSSC, in dialogue with our constituents, we've been aware of some challenges, but also a few benefits of Virtu-Cation. A few of the challenges that have been brought to our attention is the digital divide. Not everyone has access to internet, and so therefore not everyone can go to class. I mean, the Education Transformation Commission said only 20% of students have access to online engagement. So you can see that this will affect the numeracy and literacy rate going forward. And only 90% have access to the radio and television engagement. And also under the same digital divide, not everyone has access to devices, so not everyone can go onto the Google Meets or the Zoom classes. So they'll now fall short, but they can depend on the printed material that is given out by the ministry. And even the Ministry of Education, they have the tablet vouchers, but there's still a gap there because they sadly cannot be reached to everyone. So some students, unfortunately, will be left behind. And also internet access in the rural areas especially, and rural St. Andrew, near the metropolitan area there, telecommunications companies are still haven't set up poles in these areas. So these areas have no access to internet at all and have to be depending on the data plans. And Zoom and Google Meets actually takes up a lot of megabytes for the students using data plans. So therefore, they don't have long access to these classes that are online. And back to the whole telecommunications company not set up in rural areas, it has been brought that the persons who don't have these poles in their areas, they have to pay for it to be set up and then pay to use the internet. And other challenges that we've been notified of is the level of interactiveness and effective nature on the online classes. There is a lack of teachers being effective, not a lot of creativity. So usually in the face-to-face class, the teacher would teach and there will be feedback provided by the students. I heard Mr. Linver mention it, and the students, this is how you would have better form of learning for the students, because if you don't understand, you could let your teacher know, and your teacher could also know if you understand, so that they can know that they're on the right path going forward. But on the online setting, you would see the teacher teaching or reading from a PowerPoint, and not a lot of learning is taking place, because the teacher won't know if the students understand, and the students won't say anything. They would sit at the screen, they won't unmute their mics. They're afraid to say, Miss, I don't understand, or the teachers struggle to get them to say that they understand. And even in the online space, you tend to have heavy workloads, seeing that the students are going to be around the computer all the time. The excess workload hinders them, because one teacher would give a handful of information while the other one will give another handful of information. And a major challenge as well is physical and mental health. Being around the screen for a long period of time tends to give students headaches and eye aches, affecting them when they're working forward, and it damages their health. And the students are immobile. They're stuck in the seat all day around the screen, so they're not moving as they would be in physical school. They move around, they exercise their limbs and their muscles. They're in one place, and sitting in one place, being immobile too long, will cause the students to feel drained, and they get lazy, and also they get lonely. Even the introverts get lonely because they're alone around the screens all day. Usually they would interact at school with their peers, and it will cause depression, because loneliness does link to depression, and anxiety as well, because of the pandemic. They don't know if they're going to be in this online space for the entire school year. So it will affect them in terms of anxiety. And sleep patterns are also affected, because they are now hit with the heavy workload. They're working late around the screens all day, and they tend to get less sleep because they're working with the heavy workload. And also, you see that their life is at a standstill. And in our youth, this is our prime time. It is the time where we have the most fun. It is the time of enjoyment. It's the time of our life, really, before we get into adulthood and the hard work starts to come in, going to work and coming back. So the time right now is the time that we would have fun, but seeing that we're at home all day, we're around a computer screen, there's not a lot of going to school, enjoying extracurricular activities, meeting up with friends. So life is currently at a standstill, affecting our mental health. And for some students, school was a place to escape for interaction, because a lot of students feed off the interaction, the energy that they get from their friends. And this would also mitigate the loneliness that they are now feeling now at home. And another challenge would be social protection. There's not a lot of social protection in the home situation, because sadly, a lot of our students have horrifying home situations where they either live in poverty, hunger, and abusive homes. So school was their escape from abusive family members and from hunger, as they would have the school lunches to feed off of. And also with the same home situation, students are in class at home in a distractive environment. Family members could be arguing, or for those parents who work at home, there's a lot of noise in the background. Students who live in areas near the road, their homes are located near the street, so the cars passing by making noise affects them during class. And also students who are left at home, where the parents have to go to work, they are exposed to danger. I heard it mentioned before, because the criminals can now know that students are at home, they're alone, and they have their devices, which they can steal to use for themselves or sell to make a quick dollar for themselves. So students are in danger, especially in our country that has this high crime rate. But believe it or not, there are a few benefits that we have identified, and sadly they don't outweigh the challenges, but the few benefits are they are safe in regards to the COVID-19 transmission. They aren't traveling in the public. They aren't gathering at school, because when we know we go to school, we're going to be interacting and hugging our friends. So the fact that we are home and we are around the screen and we're basically in isolation, so we're protected from the virus in a sense. Our chances of getting it are now slimmer. And another benefit is time efficiency. Students are at home. They have their free time based on how their timetable is set up. So they can use this free time to do the studying, the revision, the homework, instead of being at school all day and having to wait until they get home to do their homework. They can now exercise the free time to do their homework. I do this because the free time I get during the day, I do the homework now when I have more time in the afternoon. And also for students who travel, students are now saving money from taking the bus, taking the taxi, and it's easier for them because a lot of students used to have to wake up at around 4:30 a.m. to take a bus from here, from point A to point B to point C, just to get to school. So it's easier for them now. And the chances of back then with physical school, where they would have to find a way to get home in the evening because some taxis don't want to carry home schoolers at a certain hour, it's easier for them now. They no longer face this transportation challenge. But that is all I have to present, and I thank you for allowing me to present the challenges and the benefits of Virtu-Cation on our students.
Thank you very much for your insightful comments, Mr. Douglas. I do note that some of the themes that you have raised overlap with that of Mr. Wright's own, showing that there are some commonality of experiences, such as the internet connectivity and the lack of interaction. And also, very importantly, the lack of any kind of physical exercise, especially in younger students, especially at primary prep schools. They have what's called recess, and they would get up and exercise and move around and so on. That no longer takes place. But you have also pointed out some benefits, that you have more time to study and to prepare your schoolwork. You actually no longer have to travel long distances to school. So those are some of the benefits, balancing out some of the vices of Virtu-Cation. We are now going to ask Mrs. Corey Williams, as both a teacher and a parent, to give her views and analysis of Virtu-Cation. Mrs. Corey.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, my name is Donette Corey Williams, as you probably see in the chat. And I am a teacher of English language, but I'm also a parent to two younger children. One is 11 and one is 7. So virtual education, or Virtu-Cation as we are calling it, is a very precarious balancing act for me, because my children need a little bit more attention because of the level that they're at. My daughter is actually preparing for the PEP exam. She's in grade 6. So in trying to get her prepared for her exams, it takes a little bit more assistance from my end. And my son, who is in grade 2, he needs the guidance as well. But one of the things that I will touch on, that Mr. Wright touched on too, was the fact that virtual education takes a lot more preparation than face-to-face teaching does. I feel as if I am sitting in front of my laptop for hours. It's the first thing I turn on in the morning, and it is the last thing I turn off before I go to bed. And I am in front of the machine pretty much all day, even when I have to pause what I'm doing to interact with my two children, the machine is still on and I'm still trying to make sure that I have enough activities, trying to find ways to make the lessons interactive, because the truth of the matter is online education can be boring. Sitting down and talking to a computer screen all day can be boring for both the person talking and the person's listening. So in trying to make the activities or the lessons more interactive and using Nearpod and Peer Deck and Padlet and all these other apps that you can find to make them interactive, it takes a lot of preparation, it takes a lot of planning on the teacher's side before you can execute. And these activities take a lot of time. I will say that I do enjoy using the different applications that are available for us in the virtual world that we can interact with where the students are concerned. It does concern me a great deal that there are students who do not have any connectivity. Connectivity in the sense that some of them have no device, some of them have no internet access, some of them do not have both. And so you find that there are groups. For me, I have grade 7 to 9 and then 10 and 12. For me, my grade 9 set is my lower set. I see very few of my grade 9 students, while for grade 7 and 8, I will see more of them. But I don't get to interact with the grade 9 boys as much as I would want to, because I do not see many of them in one sitting. I may have 18, maximum 20. The class is to have 39. So I don't see a lot of the boys to interact with. So I know there is an issue with connectivity. I know for some, I know for some, it is the fact that their parents only have one device. And because their parents only have one device and their parents have to go to work, they have to wait until the parents get home in order to access whatever activities are posted. And it is concerning because these students are going to be behind. And the longer we are out of physical school is the farther behind they're going to get. And I'm not sure how it is that we are going to address the issue of the students who are behind. Some of them were already behind when we started online school in March, April of this year, and they didn't have proper connectivity then. They probably have no connectivity or still not enough connectivity now. So there are some students who are farther behind than others. And for them, I am concerned because I'm not sure how we are going to address that if we get back to a space where we are face-to-face. From a parenting standpoint, I enjoy seeing the activities that my children's teachers come up with. My son is in grade 2, like I said, and I recall Cheslan talking about the fact that they are immobile. They are sitting in front of a machine all day. I realized that my son's teacher has what she calls brain break after an hour or two, where she plays a song or something and they're to stand up and they're to dance or follow the instructions based on the song that they're listening to, because usually it's one of those kids songs that tell them to lift your hands, move your feet, something. So she tries to incorporate that at different points in the daytime so that they are not just sitting constantly in front of the machine all day, all day, all day. Because like Cheslan says, it does affect their physical health eventually, because it's difficult for the children to get to the point of being physically active if they are sitting in front of a computer all day, and fairly isolated. Because my two children cannot be in the same room when they're having class, because they're talking and they're interacting with their teachers, and it creates feedback and noise. So I have to separate them, and they are in different spaces. So they are essentially isolated while they are in their class, even though they are with their friends virtually. So I do believe that the immobility does play a part, and we need to find ways of trying to get them to be more active. I think I have suggested to my HOD that maybe there needs to be a day where there is no online school, where everybody gets a break from being online. Teachers get a chance to catch up on marking, so you can actually try and give feedback, because it's difficult to mark online. Because we use Google Classroom, and it's not an application where you can go through the document and tick here and tick there. You can make comments, but it's difficult to sit and read 30 odd, 40 odd pieces online for each class, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time. And like I said, it feels as if I am constantly sitting in front of the computer. I'm not getting a chance to really do much, because when school is in session, I am literally just sitting here in this seat in the office. And it feels like a never-ending cycle of just sitting and sitting and sitting. And it is something that we have to think about seriously, because those of us who have been in the system for a number of years, we were not trained to teach virtually. We were trained to teach face-to-face. So now that we have to pivot and do this face-to-face teaching, it is not the easiest thing for us to do, particularly in instances where the training is not available for everyone to be able to learn how to use the applications. And there are teachers who have connectivity issues. Not every teacher has a laptop. Not every teacher has a tablet. Some teachers are teaching from their phones, and buying data to teach from your phone is extremely expensive, because the applications use a lot of your bandwidth. So it's difficult, especially if you are not familiar with the technology and what it is that you're supposed to do. I know, for example, that with my students, they like the applications I use that allow them to interact with whatever material I am presenting. So an application like Nearpod that has different games or different activities that they can interact with. It has a collaborate board, so everybody can post their response to a particular question. You can like each other's comments on the question that is asked. There's a matching game, there's a poll game, there are videos they can incorporate. There are 3D images that you can get. For Nearpod, there is a game that is called Time to Climb. So you set a group of multiple choice based questions, and they choose their little characters, and it is about who gets to the top of the hill first and who gets the most points by answering the questions. So there are things that teachers can incorporate to make the lessons more interesting and get the students involved. But at the same time, there are some students who, as Cheslan said, are using their phones and they have to be buying data. And sometimes those apps don't work well on a phone. They work well on your laptop or your PC or maybe your tablet, but they don't work well on a phone. So some students will still be at a disadvantage because they can't use the phone to do those applications while in class. With my children, particularly my daughter, sometimes I feel sorry for her because the preparation for PEP is so heavy, and it takes her teacher hours to go through some of the information. And there are times where she doesn't even get a full lunch hour. She probably gets a half an hour, 45 minutes for lunch. And a part of the issue is that it takes the teacher so long to go through, particularly if he's doing math, it takes him so long to go through the problems and go through the steps because, sir, I'm not hearing you. Sir, your screen freeze. Sir, you're breaking up. Sir, I'm not seeing the screen. And it takes him forever to get through the content. So an activity that in class would take an hour or so to explain, do examples, show how they would work it out, and probably give them an activity to do, it takes him 2 hours or so in order to go through what he has to do. And it stretches out the different things that the students have to cover. It takes a longer time simply because you are repeating what you're saying so often because somebody didn't hear, somebody not seeing, you're breaking up, you freeze. The technology does not always do what we want it to do. Our two providers are not capable of carrying the load that they need to carry for everybody in the island to be even using the internet. We don't have that. They can't. They're struggling to keep up with what is happening. So as a parent, it is frustrating to hear my children, sir, I can't hear, sir, this, sir, that, and I can't see the board. It gets frustrating as a parent because sometimes in my head, I say, might as well turn it off and just go sit down. Because it is, the child is frustrated, the teacher is frustrated, and the parent who is hearing all of this is frustrated as well. From a teacher perspective, it is frustrating as well because you keep repeating yourself so often. You're not getting to engage the way that you need to engage. And particularly with boys, they like to do. And for them to sit in one space for an hour and hours on end is difficult for some boys. They like to do, they like to be involved, they like to be hands-on with a lot of the things that they need to do. And because of that, it is frustrating for them, and it is boring for them. So it is frustrating and it can be boring, and but there are things that we can do. I mean, one of the things that I did before I started this school year was I watched as much YouTube videos as I could find. I learned how to use Google Classroom, Google Docs, Google Forms. I learned to use as many things as I could in preparation for online school, because in reality, I did not see school reopen in September. Based on what I was seeing happening out with the COVID numbers locally and internationally, I did not see school opening for September. So I tried to prepare myself as best as I could. And in doing that, I learned to do a lot of new things. I learned how to make a class website. I learned to do different things. And in doing that, I found videos that would be useful for the students to learn how to use. So I found videos that showed them how to send an email, how to use Google Classroom, how to do different things online so that it would be easier for them to navigate. And I posted these videos in Google Classroom when we started. So I said, boys, check out the video. It will help you to understand how to use Google Classroom, how to use the Jamboard or the different things that we were using. So it is a situation where the school has to put something in place to teach the parents how to use the applications, because there are a lot of people who are tech savvy. They know how to use Facebook, Instagram, and all the social media, but they don't necessarily know how to operate an educational app or something like that. That people have email addresses because you have to have an email address for all the social media, but they don't know how to send an email. I've had
Corey
boys
Williams,
yes.
I'm going to have to give you 1 more minute.
All right. There are boys who
One
have
more
sent,
guest.
right. There are boys who have sent me an email and the entire email is in the subject line. Everything that they need to send is in the subject line. So we have to train them how to use the different applications that we need them to use so that they can actually be tech savvy or to do what they need to do in order to survive, achieve and survive this virtual education that we're experiencing. Sorry, I went over time. Thank you.
We know, we hear the passion in your voice, Mrs. Corey Williams, as both as a parent and a teacher. So again, some other common themes, especially in relation to assistance with learning, issues with connectivity, once again, data poverty, the one device family, and also the fact is, and an important consideration, which I don't think we've ever thought about, is that nearly everybody who is teaching now, who may have graduated in 2019, was not trained to do online teaching. We were all taught in a familiar way of how to impart lessons and not by way of Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and so on. So our last guest is Dr. Kassan Troop, Chief Education Officer, person in charge of policy. And I know that we're all nice and polite people here, but also Dr. Troop kind of in the hot seat tonight. So Dr. Troop, you have your 10 minutes.
Evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I got the opportunity to listen to everyone and I understand the challenges that were outlined by our principals, the students, our teacher. You know, I myself was a principal, so I'm very, very intimate with the challenges on the ground as a school leader. I'm very intimate with the challenges on the ground as a senior teacher, as a teacher myself, you know, so I can relate to all that was outlined earlier. And we have spent years trying to master the face-to-face engagement. And even with our best selves and resources over the years, we have still not been able to get the best out of our education system, even with our expertise in the face-to-face engagement. So I can just imagine what we are going through now in this new normal. And at the Ministry of Education, we had to pivot very quickly. We had to consult. We had to, you know, had several discussions with our international and local partners just to see how we could have a model of response in the pandemic. So the Ministry of Education had to develop what we call our Education in Emergencies Response Plan to treat with the pandemic. And that entailed the policy activities and also the resourcing of the system. So we have our legs in the field, our principals, our teachers, our parents, our students, the persons on the ground who make it happen. But our role as the Education Ministry was to put the systems in place to support the activities on the ground. So we quickly had to go through a series of discussion to have a policy framework developed to govern remote learning. So we never had a policy in place for remote learning. We actually never had an education emergency plan of this nature because Jamaica has never dealt with a pandemic of this nature. I mean, the world had to adjust, but just we have always had hurricanes and we would have had systems in place to treat with that, but never before had we the opportunity to close our schools. And so we were lacking the policy. You know, we were lacking the guidelines. And when we started to do our own research, we also saw that there were gaps internationally as well, but we learned from them. So quickly, we had a policy framework in place. Then we actually had to develop several implementation guidelines. We had to do modification of our curriculum. We had to do an administrative guideline to guide our principals to lead from a distance. We actually had to retool our training program at our colleges. So the National College for Education Leadership actually had to develop a course in virtual leadership for our principals. And then our Jamaica Teaching Council had to also restructure to make sure that we had a training framework in place for our teachers. You heard it there from our teacher earlier that we were not trained for this. And so the Ministry of Education had to put the infrastructure and the facility in place to make sure that teachers had access to training facility to build their capacity to deal with the virtual space. We actually had to look at the many modalities. So not only were we offering virtual education, but we had to do a mixed modality because we never envisioned that it is ever possible for us to rely entirely on the internet. It is just impossible for any model on the ground to be fully internet-based. So our intended opportunities for the online learning, and in so doing, we improved and enhanced our partnership with Google. So our entire system could actually have a platform on which to have the engagement. We never had that when we started to pivot in the earlier phase of the pandemic. We actually had to learn and to make sure that this kind of opportunity was available. So that's the nature of the response of the ministry. And now we have majority of our students and teachers on that learning platform. Then we had to treat with the issue of access. So earlier in the earlier phases of lack of data, lack of devices. And so again, we had to restructure our budget and to expedite the procurement process for other programs that we had in trail. So we, under the heads of agreement with our Jamaica Teaching Teaching Association, there was an agreement for teachers to get tablets. We actually had to push to make that a reality, because sometimes when you don't have that urgency, things get dragged out, you know. So we had to push and make sure that those devices could get in the hands of the teachers to assist them. And then we actually had to push again to get the devices to our students who would have been benefiting from our social safety net program in the country, or PATH program. Those are the persons who are most vulnerable and would have been greatly impacted by the lack of device and access. And so we had to get those devices out. Today, I can tell you that we have distributed approximately 40,000 of those. And we're in the process of procuring for the students that we are purchasing for them. And we have another 15,000 that we are purchasing for the high school. And some of the high schools have been given funding to procure the laptops on their own for the grades 10 to 13 students on PATH. So again, we have to keep resourcing the system, adjusting our line item is in place. In addition to that, as I said, our plan is never for a child to be sitting at a computer and for the teachers to be sitting all day. We expect that there would be some form of integration. And as Mr. Lindburn said earlier, it takes a lot of planning. So we can put the framework in place, but for it to actually happen on the ground, it's a lot of planning, it's a lot of leadership on the ground for our teachers and principals to utilize the national curriculum and learning plan that we have sent out for the televised learning and the radio education to complement the online version, because we really would not want our teachers to be sitting at the computer for the entire day. We really do not want our students to be there either. So our intention was for a session or two to be on your learning management system, and then persons are directed to the televised program, and then they re-engage, and they are directed to a radio program, and then they re-engage, and so they are directed to the learning kits if they are using that as part of it. And so that is the kind of opportunity we envision within the pandemic, given the disadvantages of sitting for the entire day, given the disadvantages of being on the online facility for the entire day. The two providers cannot carry it, you know, and so we are cognizant of that. And so this is why we actually built out other complementary modalities to support the teaching and learning on the ground. We're aware that we now have to shift our focus to make sure that the complementary activities are being utilized so we can support better our teachers, you know, and to make sure that our students remain healthy during the persons are using their own data service LMS that we have provided. In the LMS framework that we have provided, we have actually partnered with Digicel to provide access to the learning management system free of cost to the end user. And a facility has been organization to build the government for that service. So persons would not have to bear the cost of the data. But we know that there are still some limitations out there. And so persons have preferences. And so what we have also done is to negotiate with the providers to reduce the cost for data. So they are coming from a plan of $2,850 per month to $500 per week. And in recent times, we have actually gone back to the table to reduce that to 1 day, 3-day plan and 5-day plan and 7-day plan at a lower cost. So some persons who may not be able to find the $500 once at once can find $300 and can find $250. And I think one of the plan is down to about $110 for 3 days. So that's our work. Our work is to do the negotiation, is to put the policy in place, put opportunity for access in place, you know, to make sure that those students who are not logging on, the teacher said it earlier, some of the boys are not logging on. We need to know this so we can put this structure in place to support us and the schools in finding these boys and girls to learn of their personal circumstances and to see how we can put the enablement in place to support the efforts of the school on the ground. That's the job of the ministry. Making sure that the policy is there, dealing with the negotiations, making sure that the resources are in place, giving the schools the resources and supporting that work for our schools. There are different situations with them. We have regular consultations, we listen to them, and we actually give the blessing or the guidelines to support them as they roll out their initiatives on the ground. We actually, through consultations with them, provided operational framework. So you have different models on the ground. You have staggered, you have rotation, you have blended. And so as we work on phasing in the face-to-face, which we started this week, we had on Tuesday, the first 17 schools starting out their face-to-face with some amount of excitement. And we are proud of this, to see that our students actually can re-engage again. We have heard the cries of the lack of interaction. It's just so boring, as the teacher said earlier. And so we really would want to push, you know, amidst the difficulties that we're experiencing with the pandemic, for our boys and girls to get back into the interaction and to seeing each other and touching each other, you know, and laughing with each other, you know. So we are happy that we can proudly say we are in the pilot phase now. We are looking to learn from that and to see how best we can replicate that. We actually start planning for the second group of school that will experience the virtual, the face-to-face learning activity in very short order. So as we learn, as we pivot, as we research, as we consult, the ministry tries to put the systems in place to support the teaching and learning on the ground. That's really our job at this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Troop. You have really, I think, enlightened us on how the ministry is trying to deal with this. I want to put an imaginary situation to you, Dr. Troop, if I may. Because right now we are in the age of COVID-19, the pandemic. But what if the pandemic is coupled with a natural disaster, such as the floods and that we've had at 9 Miles, Bull Bay, and Gordon Town? Is virtual education any limits to it, or do we have to find other ways other than technology to deal with a situation where we have both COVID-19 and a natural disaster?
Right, so there are limitations to it. That's why, Sir Taylor, I spoke earlier of the televised learning. And so currently the Ministry of Education would have entered into a partnership with the Gleaner and the Observer, where we are packaging learning materials for a 2-week period. And every 2 weeks we get a set of printed materials out into the system. Gleaner actually provides 96,000 copies of the learning kit, which covers 2 weeks of learning for our students. And the Observer provides 26 copies of kits every 2 weeks for our secondary students. And the regional offices also provide printing support for our schools in partnership with our principals. So we would have to rely, if in the case that we cannot get on the virtual space, we will have to rely on those modalities more. So we probably have to increase access to the printed materials and also build our network to deliver those to make sure that some kind of learning can continue within the context that we are treating with, and then perhaps to build up more on our radio education program. You know, we are in partnership with several of our radio stations to make sure that people can access right across this country. And we are also pivoting. We are learning of new resources that are available in the radio field, where we can actually archive and push the concept of learning on demand. So one of the things we have to be treating with now as we think of going back, you know, and try to adjust is how we can capitalize on learning spaces in our communities. We may never go back to a physical classroom for now. How can we make learning look different in terms of our current context? So the local spaces in our communities, the churches, the access points, the libraries, the corner shop, the community blackboard that you saw coming out of one of the innovations from our teachers, you know, the sharing of the devices and so forth. The Ministry of Education would have moved into providing our e-resource app, which is not something that requires the internet. How can we make sure that there's updating of the resources on that platform so students can actually continue learning without the need of the internet? You know, that the materials are aligned with the curriculum so they are not detached. So this is the kind of thinking that we have to move forward with. Interestingly, today I was in a regional dialogue with IDB and some countries, and what the conversation was about, how can we maximize on current learning spaces? How can we look beyond the physical classroom? We can't, in any definitive way, boast about the successes that we have had in the physical classroom. And so this is also another opportunity to see, or we can online, or we can push for independent learning, or we can push for lifelong learning, or we can make learning fun and learning on demand, you know, or we can pull in other learners, other players, parents, community members, the police, all kind of persons are now involved in learning. And this is how the international arena is seeing it. They are not even thinking about rushing back to a physical room. They are saying, how can we refashion and reimagine the players in education, the model of education, to capitalize on our current context and to redefine education in the 21st century. So that's where the conversation is going, and we would have to pivot in the same way.
All right. Again, Dr. Troop, I have a question coming, well, rather a comment coming in from those who are watching on YouTube. And we have one of our listeners is saying that the free data is not happening in most of the remote areas. And she's wondering if you can, you know, address that issue.
Well, I would have to know if that is not happening. I'm going to give you my email address. So once it is not happening, you send your feedback to us and we communicate with Digicel. It's actually an agreement that we have, a partnership. If our clients and end users are not benefiting, then we put them on to the troubleshooting system that we have in place, and these persons are assisted. I've had persons written to me explaining that they are not benefiting, and we have put them on to our service providers, and we have resolved the matter. Sometimes about the gadget, sometimes about some of the features not on or off in the gadget itself. So there are other technical issues that may be at play and that we just need to provide some guidelines on. So my email address is KASAN.TROUPEAM, and Sir Taylor, you can repeat that for them as we continue the discussion. That's KASAN.TROUPE@moey.gov.jm. And once we are aware, we will put you on to our telecom providers and we try to get the matters resolved. But we have been told and we have addressed those matters as they come in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Troop. The next question I have, again, comes out of the chat, but I am going to direct it to our other panelists. Since we have a teacher, a principal, and a student. And we'd ask Mr. Douglas to start first before I go to the teacher and the principal. What are the ways or the methods teachers can use to hold students' interest on the online platform? I know it has kind of been addressed already, but time was a bit limited, but I'm giving you this opportunity to address this particular question. Mr. Douglas, we're going to start with you, then we go to Ms. Corey Williams and then Mr. Wright.
My apologies, Mr. Taylor, but my Wi-Fi. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, we're asking what are the ways in which teachers can, or the methods teachers can use to hold their students' interest while on the online platform, since I believe you and others have said that, you know, the classes can become boring at times.
Well, to answer that question, I can even draw from my own experience, because what my teachers have been doing is they've engaged in educational games, various sites that they've found where they create gaming platforms. And we're answering the questions of the lessons that we're learning, but it's the way that it's set up. As you would know, most students gravitate to gaming and they would enjoy their little games and a game format. So we're doing the work, but we're in a game format, and you would see the entire class rushing to click on the link to exercise this educational game. So that's one way in which teachers can make the learning environment more engaging for the students online. And also a few breakout sessions for students where they take a rest and they can either do a few active movements such as clapping their hands or a few jumping jacks or anything to keep them moving so that they're engaged and not just sitting down and listening, but they're moving about and they're also having fun.
Yes, Mrs. Corey Williams.
I echo what Chesan has said. There are many apps that teachers can use to create interactive lessons. I mentioned Nearpod. It's an app that I use. I also use Peer Deck, which is interactive. Quizzes. It's a quiz website, so you can create your quiz and it's like a game. So the students would go on and they interact with the information there and play the game. There is Kahoot that has videos and so on. Ed Puzzles, where you can use videos from YouTube and pause the video at different points to ask questions, to have the students respond to the questions and so on. So there are apps out there that teachers can use to make the lessons more interactive, so the students are not just sitting there looking at the slides and listening to the teacher talk. And it also can be, you can also make the activities that you give them, the classwork or the homework, you can make those varying. There are apps that can teach them how to make their own comic strips, that can teach them how to make their own books. They can learn how to use the different graphics in the different apps to create their presentations that they're going to make for class. So they can use Adobe Spark Post. They can learn to make their own videos, mini movies. There are things that the teachers can teach them how to do to help them to become interested in doing the activities and in learning, because they are doing something that is fun and exciting and they're learning a new skill at the same time. So there are things out there. It just takes a little research. It takes a lot of work on the teacher's part, because you have to know how these apps work. You have to know what can be done and what can't be done. You have to engage and interact with the app yourself as the teacher before you assign anything to the students. But there are things out there that teachers can use.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corey Williams. Mr. Wright?
Well, one
As
of
a
the
head
things that I,
teacher,
yes, sir. But one of the things I push big time is relationships. I believe interest, all of these things that we're talking about are there and they work. But at the end of the day, if it is that these things that we do, in order to get these things that we do to have effect, I think the relationship we build with these kids as a teacher, and the relationship we build has got to come out of good planning, so that the children realize that in how you're presenting your lessons to them, it's not just a slapdash thing, but you really care about them in the way you, for example, when you set work for them, for example, on asynchronous platforms, how are your questions set? Are the questions just set for them to just answer and leave it, or they are sequenced in such a way that the kid becomes a little more curious each time they answer a question in the step that you're really setting up for them as a teacher? One of the things that I think has to be big time in this too is relevant. You know, how relevant are the things we're teaching to their own context, their own background? And it is important that teachers spend some time understanding the interests of many of these kids and understand that the interests are varied. And so the examples that you give as a basis of illustrating many of the points that you want to make in your class will have to resonate with the kids based on your own research of the background. And so you have got to spend some time to do that sort of thing. The final one I just love to put there is modeling. That this kind of teaching now, if it is that as a teacher you are teaching, and after you have done your examples, then there are models that you give to kids that help them to better structure their understanding within a model, a framework which says, okay, this is how you may do it next time around in order to get this concept or this principle or to do it right. And the kid actually experiences some level of success by virtue of that modeling. I think the interest is something we maintain, because my colleagues and well, students and colleagues really spend some time showing you how you could get these little games to do this. But there's also that need to sustain it with just ensuring that you plan well, that you build relationships, that you model, that what you do is varied, and that you actually ensure that when you ask questions, you ask them in ways that are going to get students to be mentally engaged in what you're doing, so that there's an interest that helps them to learn and not just feeling that it's fun. Thank you.
Okay, some more questions are there. A lot of them, I think, directed towards Dr. Troop, but I think I'm going to spread them out. So, Mr. Wright and Dr. Troop, I have a question which asks, one, how many students do you think have been left out of Virtu-Education at this time, since the government has had to devise this policy? Does the government have any statistics as to how many children were not being reached before it devised its policy? And secondly, when do you foresee in-person school at any time resuming? I would start with Mr. Wright and then Dr. Troop.
Well, I can speak to William Nib, for example. We have, one of the things we do is that we take the statistics in terms of the number of students who are on in the morning, right? And by the end of the day, we have an average of about 68 to 70% of students who are on and pretty much present when we mark the register. But when it comes on to consistent teaching sessions, learning sessions where they come to classes, we range from 70% to 52% of students, depending on the subject. So for example, when we found out last week when we did a snapshot, for example, we're finding that English was just having 52% of students, but we found that home economics was having about 70%. And then other subjects were in between that. So there's that. For me, in terms of, so I can speak with that. I know JTA had some statistics out in terms of a 30% reach. You would have heard our student friend there speaking to the Education Commission talking about 20%. I think maybe Dr. Troop can give more reliable figures, because they will get the figures at the end of each week and they would do their tallies, right? In terms of when school is going to be back, we all know that all of this is dependent on Mr. COVID. You know, it's a health crisis. It's what the numbers are at a particular time that's going to help. I just read, for example, United States schools are shutting down again because there's a spike, and Europe is having the same issue. So it is, I don't know that it's something that we can predictably tell anybody that this is going to be, because it is not something that Dr. Troop or myself or the government can really determine will happen until maybe we get some vaccine.
Dr. Troop?
Yes, what Lynn Byrne said, it has just been a very difficult task to gather the data. In the beginning of the phase, we would have reported that there was a 70-30 divide where we were able to report on engagement of about 70% of our population. We actually had CAPRI and UNICEF did some further research, and their data was consistent with our findings. And since October 5th, we have had our principals reporting to us on a weekly basis the level of engagement coming through. And we have seen a similar pattern even with our efforts at improving access to virtual learning through the reverse billing experience where the government is billed for the access, even with the increase in terms of access to devices. We are still seeing a number of our students being left out of the loop. From what Mr. Wright just indicated, today you have 70% in a particular area, another time you have 80, another time you have it. So it fluctuates weekly based on circumstances on the ground. Things change, parents lose their work from time to time, persons have to relocate from time to time. You would have seen that we have other conditions impacting access in terms of the inclement weather that the country has to be treated with. So that also will impact if a family can access or get online or be even watching the televised program. So there are a number of intervening variables that consistently impact us having a very reliable report coming in from our principals. Sometimes they themselves are not able to send the information up to us because of the difficulties that they have to contend with on the ground, when they have to deal with a death, when they have to deal with the dislocation from whatever situation happening on the ground. So there are so many variables coming through. But I would want to reflect on the external assessment and research that was done by CAPRI and UNICEF, and they would have found that we are still missing about 30% of our students from time to time.
We have a question coming from YouTube, which states, for those students who prefer online learning, going forward, will there be an option for a mixed mode learning, or will there be a total return to face-to-face at the end of the experience? So Dr. Troop, for you, in terms of policy, then Mr. Wright, principal, Ms. Corey Williams, teacher, and Cheslin Douglas.
Well, you would have heard, you would have heard me, Sir Taylor, reference to the fact that in the international dialogue that I had today, the idea is a mixed modality going forward. There's no country that is looking on going back to one modality of learning. That's just what is happening. Persons are looking at capitalizing on new learning spaces, maximizing on the opportunities that COVID would have brought us. I mean, with all the difficulties, there are opportunities. And so this is where the new model of education is going. So for Jamaica, we are never left behind, as you know. So we will watch to see the international shift, and we will make our adjustments accordingly. And of course, we always make decisions as it relates to our policies and directives and guidelines in consultation with our educators. Our principals and our teachers tend to be on the cutting edge, and they're internationally aware and regionally aware of what's happening in education. So Jamaica will not be left behind. We are doing the research, we're watching the shift, and we will make sure that our system capitalizes on every and any improved learning opportunity that we have available for them.
Yes, Mr. Wright, as a principal, and then
yes, my take on it is that, oh, okay. My take on it is that if we get back to a kind of pre-COVID situation where where we can get back to school. I think that should be the case, but I think we should really look at mixed modalities and using the technology to complement what is happening. The fact is that there are some things that I think we need to remember, that relationships are an important part of how we socialize, and I don't know that these relationships can be had in the way we are doing online learning. You heard, for example, the students speaking to how, you know, the socialization is something that they miss. So I believe that it should be a mixed modality, and we mustn't forget that while it might be good for academics for some persons, I think as a society there are some shared values that we want people to interact to have. And as such, I think that's also a part of why we need to look at ensuring that the online is complementary to what it is we're doing in terms of face-to-face learning.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mrs. Corey Williams?
I agree with Mr. Wright that if we can go back to our face-to-face situation, it would be ideal. And for me in particular, I don't know about others, but being able to use the technology within the classroom setting, some of these same apps that we are using now, if we have access to be able to use them while in a face-to-face setting, that would be ideal. But I agree, the physical interaction is important, the socialization is important. We are going to, if we have to be online for much longer, we may end up having a group of
Hello? Hello? Well, this is not one of these connectivity issues I seek to have. Mrs. Corey Williams. Hello?
Sorry about that, my sound went for a minute. I was saying that the socialization is important. I realized that particularly with my son, he has not been in primary school very long. He literally had a term and a half in grade 1. So he did not get the chance to make friends the way that my daughter has made friends. She has been at primary school for 5.5 years, almost 6 years. So she has her friends, she has her clique, and they try as best as they can to interact virtually. But my son does not have that connection. He doesn't really have any close friends coming out of school at the moment because he has not had that opportunity to really interact and to get to know them very well because he just started the school last year. So it's different when the students are not able to meet each other and to become friends and learn about different personalities and how to learn how to interact with different backgrounds and different personalities and different ways of thinking. So the physical interaction is important. The socializing, clubs and societies, sporting activities, and all of these things. These are very important aspects of developing the whole person. It's not just for people who want to be interested in that kind of thing. We are developing different social skills through these kinds of interactions. And our children are missing out on these types of skills because they are so isolated in this little bubble of virtual learning. Yes, when we're online, we see all the faces, but they're still not together. So they need to, we need to be able to get back to some kind of face-to-face activity. I don't know when, I don't know how, because everything depends on what happens with COVID, and we need to protect our children as best as we can. And school is a hotbed for things like this, so it wouldn't be a good idea for them to be face-to-face. But I'm hoping that we get to a point where if it's even 2 or 3 days out of the week, they can go to school for a few hours, maybe not the whole day, maybe half of the day, but for a few hours to get that interaction, to breathe, to get away from the house and the community and all of that, to just be children.
Remember, we have started, sorry, so we have started, so we're hoping that it will work. You know, some countries have started and would have had to shut down. Like you heard Mr. Wright talking about possibly that parts of US will have to shut down again. So we have started and we are trying, and we're really hoping that we can gradually give everybody that opportunity rather than have to shut down again. So we understand.
Yes, I know.
Mr. Douglas, as a chief customer, your comments?
Well, it would be the most comprehensive thing to do instead of having the full face-to-face one modality, because COVID is not going anywhere anytime soon, and having the mixed approach would address a lot of the issues, especially the social mobility issues, where the students can go back and have some level of interaction, because the online system is affecting that social problem. And also to have a bit more modernization in the classroom, with the technology in the classroom, modernizing the education sector going forward, and reducing the risk of any spread. So, and also addressing the students who face the most challenges in terms of online. So having that approach would be the most comprehensive way to look at it.
Thank you. I'm seeing a comment in the group, especially what Mrs. Corey Williams said, you know, from one member saying, as a teacher to help my students, I allow my students to greet each other in the mornings. We have small group meetings, the students send me invites and I join it, but it cannot replace face-to-face, but it helps for now. We are going to, as we wrap up, open, and I'm going to ask my co-host, Ms. Henry, to assist me here because I'm a technology illiterate. We're to take about 3 questions from the online participants. Those who wish to ask questions of any or all of the panelists, please do so. But my mandate is you have to be brief. It's 100 meters, not 5,000 meters. Anyone? All right, it looks as if all the questions and comments have been answered. So I think I am, yes, Andre, I see you have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman, and thanks to all the panelists for their excellent presentations. Just a quick question for our acting Chief Education Officer, Dr. Troop. The 17 schools in the pilot project that reopened face-to-face on Tuesday of this week, how were they chosen?
We had what we call a risk ranking analysis that was done, and that was informed by several variables in terms of the health protocols, whether they were able to satisfy the standards and protocols set out by the Ministry of Health. Each school would have had to be inspected repeatedly and be given a satisfactory rating, meaning that they would have had all the protocols in place, the markers, the physical distancing, the canteen operations, the cleanliness of the campus, you know, that they would have had water access, they would have had sufficient wash stations and stuff like that. So those, they would have had to pass that test from the Ministry of Health. We also looked at the risk ranking in terms of the number of positive COVID cases within the communities where those schools located. So the Ministry of Health played a critical role in helping us to narrow down the possible schools. So the infection rate, the positivity rate in those communities, most important in terms of number of persons infected and possible number of persons who will be exposed. We also looked at the population of the school, you know, to see where they are coming from. So most of the schools that we were able to select would have had 80% or more of its children walking to school. You know, they are community schools, so a majority of them are primary school. Of the 17, we only have 3 high schools in the mix. And so majority of them are primary schools. And you know, Sir Earl, that our majority of our primary school students walk to school. So that was also a major variable that impacted the selection of the schools. The high schools that were selected, we looked at the number of communities that they would have to traverse to get to the schools. And that became another variable. So the high schools that had the least number of communities that they have to cut across to get to the school, that also went into a score, you know, to make sure that we could reduce or try to keep a bubble. You know, what they use is like a pod. So we try to reduce the number of persons who are moving across that pod, you know. So that was also a variable. We looked to see that there was water facility storage as well as running water. That was another facility that we looked at. We looked at the teachers. So once we looked at those higher order variable, we also now looked at the nuances on the ground. In terms of comorbidities, in terms of access to resources, in terms of, you know, the principals training, in terms of the number of teachers trained, all of those nuances now went into the final preparations on the ground. So it's a number of variables that came together. And initially we were able to identify 73 schools that could have been open, but you know, we had to take it in stride. So we actually decided to do a pilot. And so we looked at about 20% of that, and we came out to about 17 schools. And so now we are actually observing this. We actually have inspectors in the field. Those are separate from our education officers because we wanted an objective view of things. So we have some trained inspectors coming out of our planning and evaluation development unit in the ministry, and some other persons who were contracted for this experience. We have actually developed an evaluation framework and observation schedules and instruments and surveys, and, you know, to make sure that we get a comprehensive view from parents, from teachers, from principals, from observation. So we can really decide, can we manage this as a country? Are the systems working? So what we're really doing is to look at the systems and looking at the capacity of our leaders and teachers to effectively manage school, observing all the regulations and the protocols now, and look at what is working, how are students being fed. You know, there are different models that are being used in the 17 schools. We want to see which one works best and why. And so those can help to inform how other schools will operate and keep everyone safe.
All right, I'm about to wrap up. There is a comment coming from YouTube. It says that on the social side, it appears that extracurricular activities such as brownies, Girl Guides, clubs, Red Cross have died for now. And I don't know, speaking as an alumnus of a school that has a proud athletics tradition, and this was the year we were supposed to win back champs. You know, what becomes of those students, these athletes who, you know, they put their all in and they can't get to perform and so on. So that's one comment that is out there. And I know that Mrs. Corey Williams has been saying this about, and Mr. Wright, about the social bonds formed by students, especially through sports and extracurricular activities, which also communicate values, to positive values to students. So there is that. I think I see somebody with their hand up. I'm going to take that question. Person, I think Ms. Kema Campbell, was that you?
Yes, Kema.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Kema Campbell.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Very informative session, and I'm happy that I am a part of it. One question to Mrs. Troop. Is there any consideration given to schools without internet connectivity or internet access? Because some teachers, they do not have internet connectivity or good proper internet at home, and would probably love to go to the physical school or the physical plant to conduct online classes. So I was wondering if there's any consideration be given to schools without internet connectivity.
Ms. Troop, did you hear?
Yes, there's a difficulty, but I think I've grasped what she was asking about those schools that do not have access to the internet and what is being done to support those schools, basically. So yes, we do have a plan in place. You would have heard our minister speaking of our partnership with ReadyNet. We would have identified from our survey that we have 238 schools that are in vicinities that are lacking internet infrastructure. So Digicel is not there, Flow is not there, so they actually do not have internet. So what we did was to partner with ReadyNet, and ReadyNet has a contract with us to install internet via the satellite in these areas. They are installing internet in 100 of these schools in the first instance. My last check showed that 51 of these schools were already addressed, and internet is up and running in those schools, and they continue to build out the facility. The reality is that we really wanted it to go faster, but the material and equipment had to be imported into the country, so that delayed us. Again, it was not something planned, and so accessing the resources to install the internet is also another variable that will delay our response. We are also in dialogue with Flow and Digicel to expand to other areas. Digicel actually has started. They have now a list of 32 schools, I think, if my memory serves me right, that they have started to build out the infrastructure in those schools. We actually also entered into a partnership with DigiNet that is building out the infrastructure in Clarendon, where Bustamante High School will function as a hub, and the infrastructure has been built out so the community can be served from the bandwidth that we will install at Bustamante. That's another approach that we are using, and that has started. We have found that about 80% of our schools are currently being served by Flow, and so we are now in discussion with Flow to improve the bandwidth at these schools so it can strengthen the number of persons who can be served online at the same time. So we have a plan. It's a very expensive venture, and it will also take some time because the resources are not necessarily here. The telecom providers would have indicated to us that when it gets down to December, it becomes another challenge to get materials into the country because of the demand and the port at that time. And so there are a number of variables, but yes, we have a plan in place and we are building out slowly but surely. We have also, Flow came to us discussing what they call internet in a box. That's another facility that is available for those schools that do not have the internet infrastructure in their location. And that facility functions like the internet, where information is stored on a device, and you can access the data, access the learning content, access a televised program, access a radio program. Any level of content is stored in that platform, and children can access it and treat it like you're online. So that's another facility. It's actually something that is used in other countries because it doesn't come with buffering and the other challenges that you get when too many persons are on the internet. So it behaves like the internet, but it actually gives you quicker and swifter access to data and learning resources. That is something we are also exploring for those 138 schools that are not currently being served. We have a partnership also now with NAA. They have also come on board and they are rolling out partnership. Flow has indicated that they have sent a list of 69 schools that they will expand their bandwidth free of cost as a gift to the country as part of the internet bandwidth program that we are rolling out. So a number of initiatives are in play and we gradually build them out as we try to serve. As I said earlier in my introduction, our role is to get the infrastructure and the resources in place so our teachers and our principals can have the opportunity to deal with the crux of the matter of teaching and learning in the best way they can.
All right, the questions are coming in fast and furious and thick, but I have to end perhaps with this last one. Dr. Troop, we're going to go to the vexed issue of assessment of students. There's actually a question asking how you plan to assess grade 4 and 6 students in this academic year. But if I can expand it, you know, COVID caught us all in a way that we had to change assessment methods midstream, and CSEC, you know, has faced that. But it was also a problem in England with the A-levels. Also this year, how they had to assess them and the grades, and it caused no ends of controversy, just as how CSEC caused controversy in how they had to assess students in the region this year. Going forward now, having learned this lesson, how is the ministry going to deal with assessment of students, these national and regional exams?
Well, you would have seen from the previous experience that we were able to adjust and pivot, and we were able to provide a facility where our students, though they were not able to sit all areas of their exam, we found a method to place them in a fair way as best as we can, or could have done in light of a situation. So our education system is agile and adaptive, and we're able to make the adjustments. High-stake exams like PEP is not something that we take for granted or we do random decisions on. It is something that has to be subjected to our psychometric processes, and it is something that is external to the ministry. We don't take those decisions by ourselves. We outsource the processing of our PEP. We outsource the rigor that whatever formula we come up with, it is exposed to rigor. It's exposed to the psychometrical processes that is report back into the ministry. We submit that to our cabinet, it is ratified, and then we update the nation. So we're again in that process to see how our grade 4, 5, and 6 students will be assessed. We have different models now. We have contingency plans in the event that we may not be able to sit the exams. They're all scheduled for next year, but we don't know what next year is going to be like. So we have different models and our psychometricians are reviewing them. And that is a studied approach that is presented to us, presented to our minister before any announcement is made to the country. So we are in that process.
Very well. I know that I had said finally, but it wouldn't be a good Baptist program if I didn't have more than one finally. In here, our chairman, the Reverend Jonathan Hemmings, has his hands up. So I apologize to all others, but chairman's privilege. We're going to give Reverend Hemmings the last question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Very gracious of you, sir. One of the things that we have observed as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic is that what we had accepted as normal should not have been normal in the first place. And I'm wondering if I hear us, all wanting to get back to normal as far as education is concerned. But I'm wondering if COVID gives us the opportunity to step back and to look at what was normal and to see whether or not we will be best served, and especially the poor among us, if they'll be best served with us hurrying back to the normal. Take, for example, the vexed problem of overcrowding in many of our institutions. Teacher-student ratio, in some instances. The lack of, adequate, chairs and, those other things, those difficulties that we have had over time. And I'm wondering if, even the suggestion that maybe going forward, we can have a mix of what we are doing now with, portions of what existed could serve to create a new normal that would better benefit, especially the weak and vulnerable among us.
The point is well taken, Rev. You are absolutely correct. That's the nature of the dialogue now. What you would have heard from my principal and teacher, and of course our president for NSSC, is the need for the interaction. We are a social people, if you listen to the videos going around and the regular cries and so, there is a place for our school. I mean, the disruption in the homes, parents are working, so there are other variables that we have to contend with, and so there is that place for the face-to-face, there is that place for the interaction, there is that place for the touch and the care and the love and the hug Jamaica is known for that. And so that is part of what our constituency have to take into consideration as we look at the new normal and to see how best we can make all the variables work.
Hello, I hope I didn't lose anybody. Hello?
Right, I think we had a technological glitch there.
Yes. Well,
Right,
at least the reality that has come home to all of us.
Yes, I take your point, Travis. It's just a part of the new conversation, and it is something that we all have to decide together going forward. How best can we fashion, reimagine our education system?
Same bulb that was no night light in yours. All I did was
Thank
take
you very much.
out of.
All right, we wish to thank our panelists for a very interesting and informative discussion. We wish to thank Dr. Troop on the policy side, the ministry side, who has given us and educated us and highlighted all that the ministry is trying to do in these new times. We wish to thank Mr. Linvern Wright, my old batchmate. So he claims, although I don't look anywhere as old as he does, hint, hint. As a principal and as an administrator of a school, in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, Mrs. Corey Williams, as both a teacher and a parent, and I think she managed to marry both dynamics quite skillfully today. And Mr. Chesland Douglas, you're the customer of all three, who has given a very valuable assessment as to how Virtu-Cation is going on. And I wish to thank our audience, both on YouTube and Zoom, for staying and participating. It's been a very informative discussion. Just to remind you all that this is a month of these conversations that the Social Issues Commission is having. So this is actually the second one. Last week was the one on children, in which some of the themes overlapped with Mr. Warren Thompson. Today was Virtu-Cation. Next week, and you really don't want to miss next week. Next week, we're going to have a conversation with both a trade unionist and somebody from the Jamaica Employers Federation. It promises to be interesting. No, I'm not saying that any fight is going to break out. I don't think so, but you can't miss it. If you're a worker, if you're a business person, you want to hear how COVID is affecting you in terms of layoffs, redundancies, employee rights, employer rights, human rights, how some businesses are surviving and why some businesses are dying. So you don't want to miss that. Next week, Thursday, same time. And your moderator will be Mr. Andre Earl. So good night, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you all for coming.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure having you, Dr. Troop, and all other invited guests.
Everyone.
No, Mr. Wright, you were...
Oh, sorry to disturb you, Mr. Taylor, sorry. But I just want to say thank you for having me and have a wonderful night.
Very well. The same to you.